26. Eugene Heffley. Modern tendencies in piano music. Eugene Heffley, the founder and first president of the MacDowell Club of New York, a pianist and teacher of high ideals and most serious aims, came to New York from Pittsburgh in 1900 at the suggestion of MacDowell himself. He came to make a place for himself in the profession of the metropolis and has proved himself a thoroughly sincere and devoted teacher, as well as a most inspiring master. He has trained numerous young artists who are winning success as pianists and teachers. Mr. Heffley, while entertaining reverence for the older masters, is very progressive, always on the alert to discover a new trend of thought, a new composer, a new gospel in musical art. He did much to make known and arouse enthusiasm for MacDowell's compositions when they were as yet almost unheard of in America. In an equally broad spirit does he introduce to his students the works of the ultra-modern school, Debussy, Rachmaninoff, Florent Schmidt, Reger, Liaudau, Poldini, and others. My students like to learn these new things, and the audiences that gather here in the studio for our recitals come with the expectation of being enlightened in regard to new and seldom heard works, and we do not disappoint them. Florent Schmidt, in spite of his German surname, is thoroughly French in his manner and idiom, though they are not of the style of Debussy. He has written some beautiful things for the piano, a set of short pieces which are little gems. I rank Rachmaninoff very highly, and of course use his preludes, not only the well-known ones, the C and G minor, but the set of 13 in one opus number. They are most interesting. I use a good deal of Russian music. Liaudau has composed some beautiful things, but Tchaikovsky, in his piano music, is too complaining and morbid, as a rule, though he is occasionally in a more cheerful mood. It seems as though music has said all it can say along consonant lines and regular rhythms. We must look for its advancement in the realm of dissonance, not only in this, but in the way of variety in rhythm. How these modern composers vary their rhythms, sometimes 3 or 4 different ones going at once. It is the unexpected which attracts us in musical and literary art, as well as in other things. We don't want to know what is coming next. We want to be surprised. Of the classic literature, I use much Bach when I can. I used to give more Mozart than I do now. Latterly, I have inclined toward Haydn. His variations and sonatas are fine. My students seem to prefer Haydn also. I thoroughly believe in the value of polyphonic music as a mental study. It is a necessity. And Bach is such a towering figure, such a rock of strength in musical art. Bach was essentially a Christian, and this element of devoutness, of worship, shines out in everything he wrote. I do not believe that music, without this element of worship, will live. Tchaikovsky did not have it, nor Berlioz, nor even Mozart, for Mozart wrote merely from the idea of sheer beauty of sound. In that sense, he was a pagan. I doubt if Strauss has it. One cannot foresee how the future will judge the music of today. What will it think of Schoenberg? I am holding in abeyance any opinion I might form regarding his work till I have had more time to know it better. I can only say I have heard his string quartet 3 times. The first time I found much in it to admire, the second time I was profoundly moved by certain parts of it, and on the third occasion I felt that the work, especially the latter part, contained some of the most beautiful music I had ever listened to. In regard to the technical training my pupils receive, it is not so easy to formulate my manner of teaching. Each pupil is a separate study and is different from every other. As you well know, I am not a method man. I have little use for this so-called piano method. To be a true teacher of the piano is a high calling indeed, for there are many pedagogues but comparatively few real teachers. I make a distinction between the two. A pedagogue is one who, filled with many rules and much learning, endeavors to pour his knowledge into the pupil, whereas the true teacher seeks to draw out what is in the pupil. He strives to find what the pupil has aptitude for, what he likes to do and can do best. The teacher must be something of a psychologist, or how can he correctly judge of the pupil's temperament, his tastes, his mentality, and what to do for him? When a new pupil comes, I must make a mental appraisement of his capacity, his likelihood to grasp the subject, his quickness of intelligence, his health, and so on. No 2 pupils can be treated in the same way. One who has little continuity, who has never followed out a serious line of thought in any direction, must be treated quite differently from one of an opposite mentality and experience. It would be useless to give Bach to the first pupil. It would only be a waste of time and patience. He could not comprehend the music in any sense. He would have no conception of the great things that Bach stands for. Such a course of treatment would only make him hate music, whereas to one of a more serious and thoughtful turn of mind, you might give any amount of Bach. A student with a poor touch and undeveloped hand must go through a regular course of training. The hand is first placed in position, either at the keyboard or on a table. The fingers are taught to start with up movements, as the lifting muscles need special attention. A muscle or a finger is either taut, flabby, or stiff. It is the taut condition I strive for, to make the finger responsive, like a fine steel spring. It is absolutely necessary to establish correct finger action at the outset, for the sake of finger development, clearness, and accuracy. When single fingers can make accurate up and down movements, we can put two fingers together and acquire a perfect legato. I teach 3 kinds of legato: the passage legato, the singing legato, and the accompanying legato. The pupil must master the first before attempting the others. I advise technique practice with each hand alone, for you must know I am a firm believer in the study of pure technique outside of pieces. As the student advances, we take up chord playing with different touches, scales, arpeggios, and octaves. I institute quite early what I call polyphonic technique, one hand doing a different movement or touch from the other. This works out in scales and arpeggios with a variety of touches, one hand playing a passage or scale staccato while the other plays legato, and vice versa. Asked if he taught technical material without a book, Mr. Heffley replied, "No, I generally use the Heinrich Germer work, as it covers the ground very satisfactorily. It is compact, concise, and complete in one volume. I also use Merck to some extent. Every form of exercise must be worked out in all keys. I find the books useful for all kinds of students. I may add that I use comparatively few études. If the student seems to have a very imperfect rhythmic sense, I use the metronome, but as sparingly as possible, for I want to establish the inner sense of rhythm. In regard to memorizing, I give no special advice, but counsel the student to employ the way which is easiest and most natural to him. There are 3 distinct ways of committing music: the analytic, photographic, and muscular. The analytic memory picks the passage apart and learns just how it is constructed and why. The photographic memory can see the veritable picture of the passage before the mind's eye, while the muscular memory lets the fingers find the notes. This is not a very reliable method, but some pupils have to learn in this way. Of course, the analytical memory is the best. When the pupil has the mental ability to think music in this way, I strongly recommend it. One point I make much of in my teaching, and that is tone color as a distinct factor in musical interpretation. It is not merely a question of using the marks of expression, such as FF, MF, PP, and so on. It is more subtle than that. It is the quality of tone I seek after. Sometimes I work with a pupil for several minutes over a single tone until he really comprehends what he has to do to produce the right quality of tone and can remember how he did it. The pedal helps wonderfully, for it is truly the soul of the piano. Some pupils have fancy but no imagination, and vice versa. The terms are not synonymous. Reading poetry helps to develop the aesthetic sense. Pictures help also, and nature. I must necessarily take into account the pupil's trend of temperament while instructing him. Interpretative expression is not a positive but a relative quantity. One player's palette is covered with large blotches of color, and he will paint the picture with bold strokes. Another delights in delicate miniature work. Each will conceive the meaning and interpretation of a composition through the lens of his own temperament. I endeavor to stimulate the imagination of the pupil through reading, through knowledge of art, through a comprehension of the correlation of all the arts. The musical interpreter has a most difficult, exacting, and far-reaching task to perform. An actor plays one part night after night. A painter is occupied for days and weeks with a single picture. A composer is absorbed for the time being on one work only. The pianist, on the other hand, must, during a recital, sweep over the whole gamut of expression, the simple, the pastoral, the pathetic, the passionate, the spiritual, he is called upon to portray every phase of emotion. This seems to me a bigger task than is set before any other class of art workers. The pianist must be able to render with appropriate sentiment the simplicity and fresh naivete of the earlier classics, Haydn, Mozart, the grandeur of Bach, the heroic measures of Beethoven, the morbid elegance of Chopin, the romanticism of Schumann, the magnificent splendor of Liszt. In choosing musical food for my pupils, I strive to keep away from the beaten track of the hackneyed. The mistake made by many teachers is to give far too difficult music. Why should I teach an old war horse which the pupil has to struggle over for 6 months without being really able to master, and which he will thoroughly hate at the end of that time? The Scherzo Op. 31 of Chopin and the Liszt Rhapsodies he can hear in the concert room, where he can become familiar with most of the famous piano compositions. Why should he not learn to know many less hackneyed pieces, which do not so frequently appear on concert programs? Herein lies one of the great opportunities for the broad-minded teacher to be individual in his work. According to his progressive individuality will his work be valued.